She boarded a plane from Detroit with a heart full of hope and landed in Florida believing love had finally found her. 7 hours later, she was gone. No struggle, no goodbye, only one final text. He's not like he was online. What could a man hide behind one locked door, one perfect smile, and one lie too heavy to carry? Tonight, we uncover a story so chilling it blurs the line between romance and obsession. Because when detectives finally opened that locked room, what they found turned a love story into a nightmare the world will never forget. The morning air in Detroit carried the kind of stillness that comes before a big change. At precisely 7:10 a.m., Lena Marlowe wheeled her Navy suitcase across the tiled floor of Detroit Metro Airport, her heart fluttering in rhythm with the boarding announcements echoing overhead. For months, she had replayed this moment in her mind, the day she would finally meet the man whose messages had filled her nights with laughter and hope. To her friends, the trip seemed impulsive, even risky, but to Lena, it felt like fate catching up after years of solitude. At 55, she wasn't chasing fantasies. She was chasing peace, a hand to hold after loss. As she texted her best friend, Carla Nguyen, "This is it, I'm ready." The message carried both excitement and defiance. She wanted to believe love could still surprise her. The gate agent called boarding, and Lena stepped onto the jet bridge with a nervous smile. She didn't know that by the time the Florida sun dipped below the horizon, her name would become the center of one of Fort Lauderdale's most disturbing investigations. A story that would stretch from the glow of a cell phone screen to the cold silence of a courtroom. The flight lasted a little under 3 hours, but in the coming retelling of her life, those hours would feel like a countdown. Lena spent most of it scrolling through old messages, her phone a timeline of affection, morning greetings, shared playlists, the promises of Jordan Hale, the young man who had become her digital constant. He told her he was 28, though in truth he was barely 22. Online, he spoke like someone who had lived and learned, calm, centered, thoughtful. He worked in digital marketing, he said, helping small brands find their voice. But what impressed Lena most wasn't his supposed success. It was how he made her feel. "Every word feels meant for me," she had once told Carla, who responded with a skeptical laugh. "Honey, anyone can sound perfect when you can backspace." Lena had laughed too, but beneath that humor was a truth she didn't want to face. Jordan had a way of writing that made loneliness feel like connection, and when you've spent years waking up to silence, even a stranger's good morning can feel like salvation. When the plane touched down at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, the cabin lights flicked on, illuminating her bright scarf, the one she called her lucky color. Passengers stretched and reached for bags, but Lena sat a moment longer, looking out at the Florida sky. It was glowing gold, promising warmth and possibility. She texted Carla again. "Landed safe. He's waiting at pickup. I'll call you soon." Carla replied almost instantly. "Be careful, Elle. Call me tonight no matter what." Lena sent back a string of heart emojis, her version of reassurance. Security footage later captured her walking briskly through the terminal. She didn't appear nervous, just eager. Her suitcase trailed behind her, decorated with a blue ribbon she tied to make it easy to spot. In her carry-on, a small gift box wrapped in silver paper and a bar of chocolate. "Just something to make a good first impression," she had joked. Outside the terminal, a black sedan idled in the pickup lane. The man behind the wheel, Jordan Hale, stepped out, looking around as if scanning for recognition. He shifted from foot to foot, his hands jammed in his pockets. When Lena appeared, his posture stiffened, but he quickly forced a smile. Airport cameras caught their embrace, brief, polite, almost awkward. His arms barely wrapped around her. Lena's smile lingered a second longer than his. Witnesses later told police they remembered the scene. The woman seemed overjoyed, the man distracted. She looked like she wanted everything to be perfect, one taxi driver recalled, but he just looked like he wanted to leave fast. The car door shut. The sedan rolled forward, disappearing into the Florida traffic. That would be the last verified moment anyone saw Lena Marlowe alive. The drive to Jordan's apartment near the waterfront took less than 30 minutes. He lived in a compact building with mirrored glass balconies, the kind of place that looked modern from the outside but hollow within. Residents would later tell investigators that Jordan kept to himself, rarely spoke, and often walked the halls late at night, muttering to someone on the phone. At 2:15 p.m., Lena and Jordan entered the building. A neighbor, an elderly man reading his mail, held the elevator door for them. She smiled, he recalled later. Said hello, nice lady. When asked about Jordan, the man hesitated. He looked tense, like someone trying not to lose his temper. Inside his apartment, Jordan locked the door behind them. Lena noticed the drawn curtains first. Even though sunlight shimmered through the gaps, the room felt strangely dim. A few pieces of mismatched furniture lined the walls. There were no photos, no signs of life, just a spotless, almost sterile order. Nice place, she said lightly. Yeah, Jordan replied. It's quieter this way. A hallway stretched toward the back. At its end, a heavy door stood shut with 2 metal bolts fastened across it. When Lena asked about it, Jordan waved a dismissive hand. Storage. Just stuff I haven't gone through yet. That door, cold, reinforced, and strangely out of place, would later become the center of every headline. At 2:48 p.m., Lena sent what would be her final authentic text to Carla. He's not like he was online. Carla replied within seconds, asking what she meant. No answer came. That message, 7 words long, became the turning point. A timestamp frozen forever in digital history. It was the last piece of Lena's voice before everything went silent. For the next few hours, neighbors in the building heard faint noises through the thin walls. The hum of a TV, muted conversation, a few bursts of laughter, then, gradually, a change in tone. A woman's voice rose, not in screams, but in distress. Then a man's voice followed, sharper, angrier, faster. One neighbor, a young woman in apartment 3B, hesitated with her phone in hand. I thought maybe it was a couple arguing, she would later tell detectives. I almost called security, but then it went quiet. That silence would haunt her for years. At 6:00 p.m., the Florida sky turned amber, washing the waterfront in fading light. In another world, Lena might have been sitting by the balcony, laughing about her flight, telling Jordan stories about her design work and the husband she'd lost too soon. But instead, the apartment grew heavy with tension. The details of what happened next would only surface months later, in confessions, forensic reports, and courtroom transcripts. But one thing remains certain. Somewhere between 1:00 p.m. and 8:00 p.m., Lena's journey of love turned into a corridor of fear. By nightfall, her phone would stop sending signals. By morning, her friend Carla would wake to unanswered calls. And by the end of the week, a nation would be asking the same question. What really happened in those 7 hours? Before the headlines, before the grainy airport footage, Lena Marlowe was simply a woman who had spent a lifetime trying to rebuild. Her story began in Detroit's East Side, a neighborhood of modest brick homes, church bells on Sundays, and the kind of neighbors who still shoveled one another's sidewalks in winter. For nearly 20 years, Lena had built a career as a freelance graphic designer. Her apartment was filled with bursts of color, swatches of fabric pinned to corkboards, half-finished sketches, and notes in looping handwriting that read, "Find beauty in the small things." It was a motto she lived by, even when life refused to cooperate. In her late 40s, she lost her husband to a sudden stroke, a quiet man she had met at an art exhibit decades earlier. The grief hollowed her for years, yet she carried it with grace. Friends often described Lena as sunlight in sensible shoes, the kind of person who could listen to your troubles and somehow make you feel lighter. But beneath that optimism was a quiet ache, the loneliness that follows when you've built your world around someone and then find yourself eating dinner alone. Carla Nguyen, her best friend of 30 years, knew that ache better than anyone. The two met working for a printing studio downtown and became inseparable. Carla was bold and skeptical, where Lena was soft-spoken and trusting. They balanced each other perfectly. On Friday evenings, the pair met for coffee at a small diner on Woodward Avenue. It was during one of those chats, 3 years after the funeral, that Carla first heard Lena admit what she wanted most. "I don't need excitement," Lena had said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Just someone who sees me, that's all." Carla reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then promise me something," she said. "If you ever go looking for love online, be careful. It's not the same world it used to be." Lena laughed it off, insisting she wasn't ready for anything serious. But in the quiet of her apartment that night, she opened her laptop and stared at the glow of her blank profile page for a long time. Maybe, she thought, connection could still find her in pixels instead of parks. By early 2021, the internet had become Lena's social circle. She joined creative forums for designers, spaces where people shared sketches, poems, or late-night thoughts about art and meaning. That's where she first noticed Jordan Hale's name pop up. His comments were witty, encouraging, sometimes philosophical. He wasn't pushy. He didn't flirt right away. He asked about her projects, complimented her use of color. That small kindness drew her in before she realized she was spending more time waiting for his messages than working on her designs. Soon, their chats moved from the forum to private messages, then to video calls that stretched into the early morning. Jordan's voice was calm, patient, and just vulnerable enough to feel sincere. He spoke about family struggles, about wanting to start over in life, about his dream of owning a small design agency. For Lena, these conversations felt like oxygen, something real in a world of digital noise. Her friends noticed the change almost immediately. She was glowing, Carla later said in an interview, like she'd been given a second life. She talked about him constantly, his humor, his creativity, the way he made her feel young again. When Carla asked to see photos of him, Lena showed her a handful. A clean-cut young man in a light blue button-up, standing on a Miami pier, smiling into the sun. Nothing flashy, no filters, simple and convincing. "He looks nice," Carla said carefully, "but that's a big age gap." "Hell?" Lena brushed it off with a soft laugh. "Age is just math. Heart's what matters." Carla sighed. "Just promise me you'll keep your guard up." "I always do," Lena said, though even then she knew it wasn't true. As months passed, Lena's loneliness gave way to anticipation. She started wearing brighter clothes again, redecorated her workspace, and even began painting, something she hadn't done in years. Her co-workers noticed and teased her gently. "What's his name?" one asked. She smiled shyly. "Jordan, he gets me." "Online Jordan or real Jordan?" the co-worker teased. Lena didn't mind the joke. She was proud of the connection they shared. "Real Jordan," she said softly. "He just happens to be online right now." But her optimism came with small cracks. Sometimes Jordan vanished for hours, replying with vague excuses about bad Wi-Fi or work stress. He avoided detailed questions about his past. When she asked to visit him, he said he was busy. When she suggested he come to Detroit, he said he hated the cold. Each excuse pricked at her confidence, but she ignored the discomfort, convincing herself she was overthinking it. After all, hadn't she spent years wishing someone would care again? One spring evening, Lena told Carla she was planning to meet Jordan in person. "You're flying to him?" Carla asked, shocked. "He's too busy to travel right now. His projects are all in Fort Lauderdale," Lena explained. "But he said he wants me to see where he lives. It's only for a few days." Carla frowned. "Lena, this man is half your age and you've never met him. Do you even know if his name is real?" Lena smiled patiently. "You worry too much. We talk every day. I've seen his apartment on video calls. He's real." Carla leaned back, defeated. "I just don't want you hurt again." "I won't be," Lena promised. "This feels different." Those words would later haunt Carla, echoing in her mind when detectives asked what Lena had said before leaving. The week before her flight, Lena threw herself into preparation like it was a holiday. She bought new clothes, repacked her suitcase 3 times, and wrote Jordan a small handwritten card. "For everything you've given me, hope." When she told Carla about it, her friend tried one more time to dissuade her. "Lena, please, at least send me his address and phone number." Lena laughed. "You sound like my sister." "I mean it." "Fine," she said, scribbling it down. "Now can I be excited? Just promise to check in the moment you land." "I will, pinky swear." That was the last in-person conversation they ever had. On June 14th, 2021, Lena texted at dawn, "Heading to the airport. I'll call you when I'm with him. Wish me luck." Carla stared at her phone for a long moment before replying, "Luck and common sense. Please be careful." By the time Lena's plane wheels lifted off the Detroit runway, her excitement had overtaken every trace of hesitation. She looked out at the clouds and whispered, "This is it, my new beginning." She had no idea that somewhere under those same clouds, the man waiting for her was rehearsing a very different ending. Before he became the center of headlines, Jordan Hale was a face lost among millions online. Smiling, articulate, and impossible to truly know. The man who promised Lena a future had spent years constructing a version of himself that was easier to love than the reality he lived in. Jordan grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, the youngest of 3 brothers in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. His mother worked long hours as a cashier. His father was mostly a name on legal papers. Teachers described him as bright but unpredictable, a boy who could charm his way through trouble one day and lash out the next. On the basketball court, he showed flashes of discipline and leadership, but that energy often curdled into anger when he felt slighted. After high school, his dreams fizzled. A knee injury ended his shot at college athletics, and with it, the small-town pride that once defined him. By 19, Jordan was adrift, bouncing between part-time jobs, late-night bars, and a string of relationships that burned out as quickly as they began. Each one left him more defensive, more convinced that women only stayed if he performed the part of the confident, self-assured man he imagined himself to be. That illusion would become his lifeline, and later, his weapon. 2 years before meeting Lena, Jordan's name quietly appeared in a missing persons file. Ava Sinclair, a local woman who had dated him briefly, vanished without a trace. The case went cold, overshadowed by larger crimes and lack of evidence. At the time, police questioned Jordan, who claimed Ava left town after an argument. With no body and no proof, the file gathered dust. But Ava's sister never stopped insisting he knew more than he admitted. Investigators would revisit that file much later, when the parallels between Ava and Lena became impossible to ignore. In the digital world, however, Jordan was everything Ava's family and Lena's friends would have found hard to imagine. His profile pictures looked casual yet composed. A plain t-shirt, a relaxed smile, just enough warmth to seem trustworthy. Gone were the signs of his volatility. He posted about art, resilience, and self-growth, sprinkling in quotes lifted from poetry websites. He even adjusted his age, claiming to be 28. It was an easy lie to maintain. With his carefully curated lighting and clean grooming, he could pass for older. The number wasn't arbitrary. It positioned him perfectly between youthful energy and adult reliability, the sweet spot for someone like Lena, who sought maturity but still wanted to feel seen by someone vibrant and new. To reinforce the image, Jordan told small stories that sounded authentic, helping local artists promote their work, volunteering at shelters, spending weekends sketching at the pier. None of them were true. But in the world of online conversations, truth mattered less than rhythm, the gentle confidence that makes someone feel safe. When Jordan first messaged Lena on that creative forum, his tone was soft, complimentary, but not forward. "Your color work has so much emotion," he wrote in one of their early exchanges. It wasn't an extraordinary line, but it was calculated. Compliments tied to creativity, not appearance, often disarmed people. Lena replied, thanking him, surprised anyone had even noticed her post. From there, conversation flowed effortlessly. Within weeks, Jordan studied her online habits the way some study a script. He noted her humor, the phrases she used, the hours she stayed online. When she mentioned feeling tired after long projects, he began sending her check-in messages before bedtime. "You've worked hard. Rest easy tonight." For a woman who'd spent years without consistent affection, those small gestures began to mean everything. But while Lena saw devotion, Jordan saw control. Every compliment was a thread he could pull tighter when needed. When she didn't reply quickly, he would wait just long enough before sending another message. Gentle at first, then tinged with guilt. "Guess I said too much again." He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for proof that he still mattered. In every conversation, he needed to feel admired, validated, needed. Yet online, his fragility disappeared behind emojis and curated words. He became a master of performance, reading Lena's responses as cues in a play. When she opened up about her late husband, Jordan played the empathetic listener. When she shared insecurities about her age, he called her timeless. Every word was a transaction, a way to ensure she stayed tethered. What Lena didn't know was that Jordan's confidence was paper-thin. In the real world, he lived alone in a sparsely furnished apartment, his finances hanging by a thread. His landlord would later recall nights when Jordan paced the hallway, talking to himself, sometimes punching the walls in frustration. Something about women drove him up and down, the landlord told police later. He'd be fine one day, angry the next, said people always made him feel small. That insecurity festered into paranoia. The idea that anyone, especially a woman, might see through him terrified him. So when he began talking to Lena, the age difference that should have made him self-conscious instead became part of his script. With her, he could reinvent himself. She wouldn't know his past, wouldn't question his inconsistencies, wouldn't remind him of Ava or the whispers that followed her disappearance. Their first video call happened on a rainy evening. Lena remembered it clearly when telling Carla about it afterward. His room dimly lit, a soft background song playing, his voice low and soothing. "He looks younger than I thought," she admitted. Carla frowned. "You sure that's not a red flag?" "He's just well preserved," Lena laughed, brushing it off. But something in her tone, a mix of amusement and defensiveness, made Carla uneasy. As the months passed, Jordan's messages intensified. He began calling Lena Queen, sending good morning texts before sunrise. He made sure his presence filled every empty space in her day. And when he wasn't texting, he was watching, scrolling through her posts, reading her comments, analyzing who she interacted with. From the outside, it looked romantic. To Jordan, It was surveillance disguised as affection. Behind that charm, another pattern brewed. His neighbors in Fort Lauderdale would later describe frequent late-night outbursts, muffled arguments with unseen callers, heavy footsteps, and once a crash loud enough to rattle a picture frame next door. When one neighbor asked if everything was okay, Jordan smiled politely and said, "Just movie night." But inside, he was unraveling. Old wounds resurfaced, memories of Ava's laughter, the humiliation of rejection, the mockery he believed lingered in every woman's eyes. He told himself Lena would be different, but even as he typed, "Can't wait to hold you," his mind was filled with suspicion. As June approached, his paranoia deepened. Friends he occasionally saw at a local gym noticed his agitation. He talked about a woman visiting, one acquaintance said later. Said she was older, successful, smart. He sounded nervous, like he was trying to convince himself it'd go well. Another recalled a chilling line Jordan muttered under his breath after a heated phone call. "I won't let anyone make a fool of me again." Those who knew his temper brushed it off as bluster, but that sentence would become a key detail in the prosecution's case months later. By the time Lena booked her flight, Jordan's anxiety had crossed into obsession. He cleaned his apartment twice in one night, rearranging furniture until dawn. He texted her constantly, alternating between tenderness and passive aggression. When she joked, "Don't panic, I'm just a normal woman," he replied, "Don't ever lie to me." She laughed, thinking it was flirtation, but to him, it was a warning. In Detroit, Lena folded her scarves neatly into her suitcase, her mind spinning with images of beaches, laughter, and redemption. In Fort Lauderdale, Jordan stood before the mirror, staring at his reflection until his smile looked rehearsed enough to pass. Two people on the same countdown, one dreaming of love, the other haunted by humiliation. By the time their paths finally crossed at the airport curb, one thing had already been decided, though neither knew it yet. Only one of them would leave that apartment alive. It began like every modern love story. 2 screens, 2 hearts, and thousands of words typed into the late-night glow. For Lena Marlowe, the connection felt as natural as breathing. For Jordan Hale, it was a performance, refined with every message. The first few weeks were innocent. Gentle jokes, shared playlists, conversations about art and favorite places. Lena would send him photos of her latest designs, and he'd reply with exaggerated awe. "You make colors feel alive," he wrote once. But those words weren't his. Investigators would later find entire phrases lifted from a design blog, copied and pasted like lyrics. To Lena, it didn't matter. His messages felt deliberate, thoughtful. He seemed to notice the smallest details. Her scarves, her love for mint tea, even the way she signed emails with warmly. "No one's ever paid attention to me like that," she told Carla Nguyen, laughing as they had coffee one afternoon. "He listens. He actually listens." Carla gave her a long look. "Or he knows what to say." Lena waved her off. "You're too cynical." "Maybe," Carla said softly, "but I've seen how easy it is to fall for the idea of someone." That line would echo later, long after the texts stopped coming. By spring, the digital bond between Lena and Jordan had deepened into ritual. Every morning, she woke to a text. 6:30 a.m. "Good morning, my queen. Hope today treats you kind." Every night before bed, she'd whisper into the phone during their video calls, "Good night, Jay." Sometimes he read her poetry. Other times, they shared silent moments, staring at each other through the glow of the screen. Pretending that distance wasn't an obstacle. But behind his calm voice and soft words, Jordan was studying her. He asked about her finances, her apartment, the people in her life. When she mentioned a male co-worker who'd helped her with a project, he replied too quickly, "He sounds interested in you." It was playful at first. Then came the subtle possessiveness. He began checking in more often, asking where she was, who she was with. "Just making sure you're safe," he'd say. Lena, touched by his concern, mistook control for care. In March, Jordan's tone shifted. The more Lena opened up, the more he started steering conversations toward intimacy. Emotional first, then suggestive. His words grew hungrier, demanding validation. "You make me feel like a man again," he told her during one call. "Don't ever stop seeing me that way." For Lena, whose confidence had been fragile since her husband's passing, those words mattered. They stitched up small insecurities she hadn't voiced aloud. Carla noticed the change too. Lena seemed happier but distracted, her thoughts always circling back to Jordan. When asked if she'd considered meeting him in person, Lena smiled shyly. "He's mentioned it," she said. "He wants me to visit." Carla frowned. "He can't come to you." "He says he's overloaded at work. His company's expanding." Carla raised an eyebrow. "Has he given you the company's name?" Lena hesitated. "Not yet. He's private about that stuff." "Private," Carla repeated quietly, the word landing like a warning. Jordan began planting seeds for the visit, weeks before suggesting it outright. He sent Lena photos of beaches, restaurants, and city lights reflecting off the water. "You'd love it here," he wrote. "Blue skies every day, and I know this cafe that makes tea just like you like it." It worked. The idea took root, slowly replacing Lena's doubts with anticipation. One night, during a particularly long call, Jordan said, "Just imagine it. You and me cooking dinner, watching the sunset from my balcony. You deserve that peace." Lena smiled, eyes glistening in the glow of her laptop. "That sounds perfect." "Then come," he said softly. "Just a few days. I'll take care of everything." That simple invitation, laced with confidence, broke through every wall of hesitation she had left. In the weeks that followed, Lena began making plans. She bought a plane ticket for mid-June, secretly rehearsing what she'd say when they finally met face-to-face. Her friends teased her about it. "Long-distance fairy tale," they called it, but she didn't care. Carla tried one last time to intervene. "You're flying to Florida to meet a man half your age that you've never met? Elle, I'm begging you, at least video chat one more time before you go. Confirm the details." Lena smiled, but her tone carried finality. "I've done my worrying, Carla. I'm ready to live again." Carla's instincts screamed something was wrong, but friendship often walks the line between concern and restraint. She let it go, praying she'd be proven wrong. As the departure date drew near, Jordan's messages took on a frantic rhythm. He called her his reason to breathe, his light in the dark. But beneath the flattery, there was tension. Neighbors later told detectives they'd seen Jordan pacing the parking lot at odd hours, muttering into his phone. One recalled hearing him snap, "You won't make me look stupid again," though no one could tell who he was talking to. Privately, Jordan's anxiety was eating him alive. He had built an illusion too perfect to sustain. In his head, he replayed every lie, every embellished story. What if she noticed the gaps? What if she saw through him? For Lena, the same countdown felt romantic. For Jordan, it felt like a trap closing. 2 nights before her flight, Jordan called her late. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. He told her he couldn't sleep, that he was nervous but excited. "I don't care what people think," he said. "I just want you to see the real me." If Lena sensed the irony in that statement, she didn't show it. She only smiled and said, "I can't wait to finally meet you." When the call ended, she sat in silence for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the dark window. It had been years since she'd felt that alive. In Fort Lauderdale, meanwhile, Jordan stood in front of his mirror, practicing his smile. He adjusted his shirt, stared into his own eyes, and whispered, "She's not going to see through me. Not this time." The morning of June 14th arrived warm and cloudless. Lena's suitcase stood ready by the door, a blue ribbon tied to the handle. She snapped a photo for Carla, half joke, half ritual. "Wish me luck," she texted. Carla replied, "Luck, love, and please keep your guard up." Lena didn't answer right away. She was already boarding. As her plane soared southward, she leaned back in her seat, imagining palm trees, laughter, and the thrill of beginning again. Her heart was light, her faith unshaken. 3 hours later, Jordan's sedan idled outside the terminal, the Florida heat shimmering on its hood. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting the mask of calm that had always fooled strangers. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The moment his fantasy would either survive or collapse. And as fate would have it, it took just 7 hours for both to unravel. The plane touched down at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport just past 1 in the afternoon. The sky outside glowed an impossible shade of blue, the kind that makes every traveler believe they've arrived somewhere meant for new beginnings. For Lena Marlowe, it wasn't just a vacation. It was a rebirth she had spent months convincing herself she deserved. She texted Carla Nguyen as soon as the plane slowed on the tarmac. "Made it safe. He's waiting outside. We'll call you later." Carla replied instantly, "Remember, share your location." Lena chuckled softly. She didn't see the need for worry. This was the moment she had been building toward since the first message months earlier. Her nails tapped against the phone screen as she typed, "Relax, Mom, I'm fine." She hit send with a grin. That exchange would later become part of the official case file, the last time Carla ever received a real text from her best friend. Inside the terminal, Lena was radiant. Airport cameras caught her weaving through the crowd, scarf fluttering as she rolled her navy blue suitcase behind her. She paused briefly at a vending machine to grab a bottle of water, then glanced down at her phone. Her lips moved as she read a message, and for a split second, her smile faltered. Investigators would later note the timestamp, 1:17 p.m. Jordan had texted, "I'm parked out front, near Gate C. Don't make me wait too long." It didn't read as threatening, just impatient, but in hindsight, even that small command hinted at the dynamic soon to unfold. Outside, the humidity clung to the air. Dozens of cars idled at the curb. Jordan's black sedan was easy to spot, sleek but worn, the kind of car detailed often enough to look respectable from a distance. He stepped out when he saw her approaching, straightening his collar and running a hand through his hair. Their first real-life meeting lasted only seconds but would be analyzed frame by frame later by law enforcement. He smiled, but didn't reach for her hand until she did first. Their hug was short, polite. No laughter. No reunion energy. Just a formality between two people trying to bridge a digital dream with physical reality. She looked thrilled. He looked rehearsed. A cab driver waiting nearby later recalled the moment clearly. "She seemed so happy, nervous happy," he told detectives. But him? He had this stiff body language, like he was there out of obligation. Lena didn't notice. She loaded her suitcase into the trunk, thanked him for waiting, and slid into the passenger seat. The door closed. The sedan merged into traffic and disappeared down the exit ramp. That 3-second clip of them driving away would become the final public record of Lena alive. The drive to Jordan Hale's apartment took less than half an hour, but witnesses would later describe seeing the car parked briefly at a gas station off Biscayne Boulevard. Surveillance footage showed Jordan stepping out alone to buy a pack of cigarettes. Lena remained in the passenger seat, glancing down at her phone. At 1:46 p.m., she texted Carla a single line. "He's real." Carla, at work, smiled when she read it. "Told you so," she replied. Lena never responded. Jordan's building was a modest modern complex near the waterfront, white stucco, tinted glass balconies, and a lobby that smelled faintly of cleaning solution. Cameras captured the pair entering at 2:15 p.m. Lena held the elevator door open for an older neighbor carrying groceries. "You have a lovely place," she said kindly. She was sweet, the woman later recalled. Smiling, friendly, the kind of person you instantly like. But the man with her, he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Just stared at the floor. They rode up to the 4th floor. After that, the cameras saw only Jordan returning alone hours later. Inside his apartment, the air was cool and still. Heavy curtains blocked the daylight, and the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. For Lena, it was a sharp contrast to the warmth he'd shown online, the sunlight, the laughter, the life he claimed to have built. The space was clean but empty. A couch, a table, 2 chairs, no art, no books, no signs of personality. "You just moved in?" she asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Something like that," he replied, keeping his distance. Her gaze drifted down the narrow hallway, where a heavy door stood shut with metal bolts across it. "What's that room?" she asked casually. "Storage," he said too quickly. "Old stuff, don't worry about it." She nodded, but the tone in his voice lingered in her mind. Over the next hour, things felt off. Jordan's energy shifted between charming and distracted. He kept glancing at his phone, but always placed it face down when she looked. At one point, he excused himself to take a call in the other room. When he returned, his demeanor had hardened, his smile tight. Lena tried to keep the conversation light, talking about her flight, Detroit, and how surreal it felt finally meeting him. But the warmth she expected never came. "He's different in person," she whispered to herself later that afternoon, typing out a quick message to Carla at 2:50 p.m. "He's not like he was online." Carla, in another city and unaware of the danger, sent back, "What do you mean?" The message was marked delivered. It was never read. At roughly 3:30 p.m., neighbors began to notice the faint sound of voices through the paper-thin walls. One described hearing a woman's laughter fade into a low argument. Another, a man across the hall, remembered the rhythmic sound of footsteps pacing back and forth. "I thought maybe they were having a lover's quarrel," he said later. "You hear that kind of thing all the time. It didn't sound violent, just tense." But tension, in hindsight, was the first crack in the illusion. By 4 p.m., the hallway grew quiet again. The same neighbor would later testify that he heard a single loud thump, like something heavy striking a wall, followed by silence. At the time, he turned up the volume on his TV and thought nothing of it. That silence became the marker between before and after. Inside the apartment, Lena's phone stopped transmitting data at 4:22 p.m. The same minute her final message was logged. Every notification after that would be generated not by her, but by the person sitting a few feet away. For investigators reconstructing the timeline later, this was the moment everything shifted, from a reunion filled with hope to the slow unraveling of a nightmare. Outside, the Florida sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. In another life, Lena might have been out there taking photos, laughing about her first trip to Florida. Instead, she stood in an unfamiliar apartment beside a man whose smile had already vanished. She had no idea that every door behind her was about to close. That evening, Carla refreshed her phone again and again, waiting for the promised call. None came. She told herself flights were tiring, that maybe Lena had fallen asleep. But by midnight, a creeping unease settled in. She sent another message. "Just checking in. You okay?" The screen stayed blank. When morning came, that silence would no longer feel like distance. It would feel like a warning too late. And somewhere in Fort Lauderdale, a locked door waited to reveal everything she never wanted to know. By the time the elevator doors shut behind them, Lena Marlowe had already begun to sense something wasn't quite right. The air in Jordan Hale's apartment was stale, heavy, and almost too quiet. The kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own breathing. Jordan moved quickly, tossing his keys onto the counter, muttering something about work emails. His voice carried the same smooth cadence she'd come to know through screens, yet in person, it felt different, strained, clipped at the edges. Lena tried to ignore the unease, setting her purse on the couch. "You have a beautiful view," she said, stepping toward the balcony. "There's not much to see," he replied sharply, moving to pull the curtains closed before she could look out. The gesture froze her mid-step. The sunlight vanished, replaced by the dim buzz of an overhead bulb. For a brief moment, Lena thought of Carla Nguyen's voice in her head. "Trust your instincts, Elle." She brushed the thought aside. "Maybe he's just private," she reasoned. "Not everyone likes to show their space." But the more she looked around, the more that space began to feel less like a home and more like a set built for a part he didn't quite know how to play. The apartment itself was unsettling in its emptiness. The walls were bare except for a single clock that ticked unevenly. The furniture was mismatched, the kind one buys second-hand in a hurry. On the coffee table, a half-empty bottle of water sat beside a small leather notebook. "Nice place," she said again, forcing lightness into her tone. Jordan gave a small nod. "It's quiet," he murmured. "That's how I like it." Her gaze drifted down the hallway. There, at the end, stood that locked door, heavy, reinforced with steel brackets. It was impossible to ignore. "What's in there?" Lena asked, half joking. "Storage," he said without hesitation. "Lot of locks for storage." He paused. "Just old stuff. Don't worry about it." The finality in his tone made her drop the subject, but something about it stuck in her chest like a pebble lodged in a shoe. As the afternoon wore on, Jordan's behavior grew more erratic. He paced between rooms, checking his phone, then tossing it onto the counter face down. When she asked if everything was okay, he smiled too wide. "Just tired," he said. "I didn't sleep much last night." To ease the tension, Lena suggested ordering takeout. "You said there's a great Cuban place nearby, right?" "Yeah," he replied distractedly, already scrolling through his phone. Then abruptly, he changed the subject. "You know, you look different in person. Not in a bad way," he added quickly. The comment was harmless on the surface, but it hit her strangely, as if she'd failed to match the fantasy he'd built. She laughed awkwardly. "I guess filters work both ways." Jordan didn't laugh. He was staring at her now, expression unreadable. At 2:50 p.m., she excused herself to the bathroom and texted Carla. "He's not like he was online." It was the kind of brief, uneasy message you send when you don't want to overreact. Part confession, part denial. Carla's reply came seconds later. "What's wrong?" Lena never read it. Back in the living room, Jordan was sitting perfectly still, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "You okay?" she asked gently. He looked up slowly. "You ever feel like people think they know you when they don't?" Lena hesitated. "I guess everyone feels misunderstood sometimes." "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "But it's different when they think you're weak." The word hung between them. Weak. Lena forced a smile, trying to redirect the conversation. "I don't think you're weak, Jordan." He blinked, as though trying to decide whether to believe her. For a moment, the room softened again. The tension receded, but that peace lasted only seconds before he stood abruptly, muttering something under his breath, and disappeared into the hallway. From the couch, Lena heard the faint metallic sound of a bolt sliding into place. He had locked the door. Again. Minutes passed. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself she was overthinking. Maybe he was just nervous too. First meetings are awkward. Maybe he just needed space. But when Jordan returned, his energy had shifted completely. His smile was gone, replaced by a hard, distant stare. "Who else knows you're here?" he asked suddenly. "Just my friend," she said carefully. "Why?" He shrugged. "No reason. You just seem like someone people worry about." Her pulse quickened. Down the hall, through the thin drywall, neighbors began to notice movement. A young couple in apartment 4B later told detectives they heard two distinct voices, one calm but defensive, the other rising, angry, accusatory. "It started like a normal argument," the woman said. "Then we heard something slam. Maybe a door, maybe the wall. I almost called 911, but my boyfriend said it was probably nothing." They turned the TV up and tried to ignore it. Another resident, directly below, reported footsteps, pacing back and forth. "It went on for a while," he recalled. "Then everything stopped, like someone cut the sound." Inside the apartment, Lena sat frozen. Jordan's questions came faster now, about her past, her ex, her intentions. "Why me?" he demanded. "You could have had anyone. Why'd you pick me?" She tried to calm him. "Because I like you, Jordan. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." But the reassurance didn't land. He stood too close now, his jaw tight. "Are you laughing at me?" he asked quietly. "What?" "No, of course not. People laugh," he muttered. "They always laugh once they see the truth." The shift in his tone chilled her. She rose slowly from the couch. "Maybe I should go. You're tired and—" "No," he interrupted sharply. "We're fine." But his body language said otherwise. The clock ticked. The air conditioner hummed. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's dog barked once, then fell silent again. Lena took a step back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jordan, please. You're scaring me." He didn't move, just stared, breathing hard, hands flexing at his sides. At 4 p.m., another muffled thud echoed through the hallway. The same neighbor who'd considered calling for help hesitated again, thumb hovering over her phone. "I told myself it wasn't my business," she would later testify. "If I'd known—" Her voice trailed off. But at that moment, the building returned to silence. For investigators, that silence marked the turning point, the shift from unease to tragedy. For Lena, it was the last stretch of time when escape was still possible. Had she opened the door, run to the elevator, shouted for help, maybe things would have ended differently. But love, fear, and confusion can trap a person as effectively as any lock. She was still trying to make sense of the man in front of her. The man who had once called her Queen, who had promised her laughter and sunlight. Now, standing under the dim yellow light, she could barely recognize him. And deep in the hallway, behind the bolted door, something unseen waited. A secret that connected two women's stories across time. Lena didn't know it yet, but she had already stepped into a room built entirely out of lies. By 4:15 p.m., the stillness inside Jordan Hale's apartment had turned electric. Every sound felt amplified, the uneven tick of the wall clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant chatter of traffic below. Lena Marlowe stood near the doorway clutching her purse strap, her heart thudding like a drum beat. Jordan's gaze never left her. He had gone quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't come from calm, but from pressure, like air right before a storm. "I think maybe I should go back to my hotel," she said softly, trying to keep her voice even. "It's been a long day. We can talk tomorrow." Jordan tilted his head, studying her. "So that's it?" His tone was flat, emotionless. "You come all this way and now you're running." "I'm not running," she replied gently. "I just feel like you're upset. I don't want to make things worse." Something flickered behind his eyes. A flash of panic disguised as rage. "You think I'm upset? You don't know what upset looks like." Outside, a neighbor in apartment 4B paused her movie. Through the thin drywall, she heard muffled arguing, a man's voice rising, then a woman's trying to calm him. It sounded like a couple fighting, she later told detectives. It wasn't violent yet, just sharp. You could tell it was escalating. Back inside, Lena's instinct screamed to leave, but part of her hesitated. She had come so far, told everyone she trusted that this trip would prove love still existed. Walking out now meant admitting it was all a mistake. "Jordan," she said, forcing calm. "You've been wonderful to me online, but maybe we just need some space in person. That's okay." He laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You think I don't see it?" "See what?" "The look. The same one they all have when they realize I'm not enough." She took a cautious step back. "No one said that." "You don't have to." His voice cracked. Not from sadness, but from something deeper, older, shame. Forensic psychologists would later call it a narcissistic collapse, the moment when a carefully constructed illusion crumbles under the weight of reality. For Jordan, it was the instant Lena's empathy felt like pity, and pity was intolerable. He clenched his fists. "You're going to leave and tell everyone, aren't you? That I'm a fraud, a joke? Jordan, stop," she pleaded. "No one's judging you. Don't lie to me." His shout ricocheted off the bare walls, startling them both. The sound carried through the hallway. Another neighbor paused, frowning. It was sudden, he recalled, then a loud noise, like something falling or being thrown. Lena reached for her bag, her voice trembling. "Please, I just need to go." But to Jordan, those words weren't escape. They were betrayal. In his mind, leaving meant rejection, and rejection meant humiliation. "You're just like her," he muttered. "Like who?" He didn't answer. His eyes were far away now, lost somewhere in memory. Investigators would later connect that name, her, to Ava Sinclair, the ex-girlfriend who had disappeared 2 years earlier. Lena had no way of knowing that in his mind, she was no longer herself. She had become the echo of every woman who had made him feel small. Jordan moved closer. His voice softened, almost gentle. "You said you cared about me." "I do," Lena whispered, hands trembling. "But I can't stay if you're angry." "I'm not angry," he said through gritted teeth. "I just need you to understand." He reached out and touched her wrist. Not a strike, not yet, but firm enough to make her freeze. "Jordan, please," she said, pulling back. "You're scaring me." "Don't say that." His grip tightened. "I'm not the bad guy." Her pulse raced. She tried to step back, but the wall met her shoulders. "Let go of me." Something inside him broke. "You think you can just leave?" And then, the sound, a single, heavy thud. Neighbors would describe it later with haunting precision. It wasn't a scream first, it was impact, like flesh hitting drywall. Then silence. A TV somewhere down the hall played faintly. The couple in 4B turned to each other, uneasy. "Should we call someone?" she asked. Her boyfriend shook his head. "Probably just an argument." That hesitation would haunt them for years. Inside, time collapsed. Jordan stood motionless, his hands shaking, his breath shallow. Lena lay crumpled near the hallway corner, unmoving. The suddenness of it stunned even him. He whispered her name once. No answer. Twice. Still nothing. His mind spun. She slipped. It was an accident. I didn't mean to push her that hard. But denial couldn't drown out the truth. The mark on the wall where her head had struck, the blood spreading faintly against the paint. Jordan backed away, panic setting in. He pressed his palms to his temples, muttering to himself, She can't leave like this." The clock read 4:24 p.m. when the world outside continued unbothered. Children playing near the waterfront, a delivery truck rumbling down the street, the golden Florida sun cutting through the blinds. Inside apartment 4C, the light never reached her. Jordan sank to the floor, staring at what he'd done. Minutes stretched into hours. His phone buzzed once. Carla's name flashing across the screen. He didn't answer. In another city, Carla sat at her desk, rereading her last text. Something about it gnawed at her. She typed, "Elle, are you okay?" and waited. There was no reply, no read receipt, only the faint illusion of connection that technology provides, a digital heartbeat where life had already stopped. Later, in interrogation tapes, Jordan would tell detectives, "She looked at me like I was nothing. I couldn't take it." But in that moment, there was no rage left, only shock. He stood over her, silent, the glow from his phone casting long shadows on the wall. He told himself a story, that she had tripped, that maybe she would wake up, that this wasn't real. It was easier than facing the truth. He had turned the only person who believed in him into proof of everything she never saw coming. At 4:30 p.m., the argument ceased. The neighbors returned to their lives. The elevator dinged. The sun slid lower. No one knocked on Jordan's door. No one asked if she was all right. And for the next hour, he sat in that still apartment, replaying every second of what he couldn't undo. The screen of her phone blinked once on the coffee table. A notification from Carla, unread, before the light faded again. 7 hours earlier, Lena had smiled into a camera and said she couldn't wait to meet the man who made her believe in love again. Now that love was gone, replaced by silence so total it would take weeks for anyone to realize she was missing. And in the dark of that apartment, Jordan Hale began to plan his next move. When the noise finally stopped, Jordan Hale just stood there. The apartment was silent, except for the uneven ticking of that cheap wall clock and the shallow sound of his own breathing. The scene before him was something he couldn't reconcile. One moment, Lena Marlowe had been alive, pleading, frightened, very real, and the next, she was motionless at the corner of the hallway, her head resting against the baseboard. He whispered her name once, twice, as if sound alone might undo what had happened. When she didn't respond, his panic curdled into calculation. "Okay," he muttered to himself, pacing. "Okay, think." In those first few minutes, there was no grief, no remorse, only fear of exposure. At 4:40 p.m., Jordan picked up her phone. Her lock screen glowed with a photo of a lakeside sunset. He scrolled through her messages, his reflection staring back from the dark glass. There it was, the most recent text to Carla Nguyen. He's not like he was online. He read it again and again, realizing how damning it sounded. In a haze of panic, he opened the message thread and began to type. "All good. Miami is beautiful. He's even sweeter in person." He hesitated before hitting send. Would Carla believe it? Probably. Lena was known for optimism. No one would expect anything else. Jordan hit send anyway. That single fake text would buy him less than 72 hours of freedom. But at that moment, he believed it was enough. He placed Lena's phone back on the counter, face down, as if that small act could erase everything. Then, moving quickly, he dragged her body away from the hallway corner. The walls had a faint smear of red near the molding. He stared at it, breathing fast, then disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a wet towel. He wiped it away once. The color faded but didn't vanish. Twice, still visible. So he reached for the can of white paint he'd used months earlier to cover a scuff mark. He dipped a paper towel in it and began blotting. The patch looked uneven, but it was something. At 5:30 p.m., Jordan sat on the floor staring at the spot where she had fallen. His mind wandered to the locked room down the hall. Behind that door lay reminders of another story, one he'd managed to keep buried. Boxes, photographs, and a bracelet engraved with the name Ava Sinclair. He hadn't opened the door in months, but now, standing in that hallway, he considered it. The room represented two things at once: fear and control. It was the vault where he'd hidden the last time he'd lost himself. He unlocked the top bolt, then stopped. "Not her," he whispered. "Not again." He couldn't put Lena in there. It would make the past and present collide, and that thought terrified him more than anything. Outside, neighbors heard faint movement again, something heavy being dragged across the floor. One woman thought it sounded like furniture shifting. "I remember thinking he must be rearranging," she said later. "I had no idea." Hours passed. By nightfall, Jordan's panic turned methodical. He stripped the bed, grabbed a blanket, and wrapped Lena carefully, avoiding her face. He moved her to the living room, closer to the door. He didn't have a plan yet, just a need to make her disappear. At 8:12 p.m., Carla's phone buzzed again. Another message from Lena's number. "All good, sis. Fort Lauderdale is gorgeous." But something about it didn't feel right. Carla frowned. Lena never used sis. It was too casual, too unlike her. She texted back, "Call me. Want to hear about him." No reply. That unease stuck with her for days. Meanwhile, Jordan paced the apartment, muttering to himself. His phone pinged repeatedly, messages from friends, work contacts, ignored. He picked it up once, hovered over the 911 keypad, then put it back down. "They'll never believe me," he said aloud. "They'll think it's like before." He meant Ava. The memory of that name was a wound he couldn't close. By midnight, the plan began forming. He would make it look like Lena had left voluntarily. Maybe she'd gotten upset, stormed out, taken a cab. He'd tell police she never came by or that she left early. He'd even offer to help them look. He gathered her suitcase, still packed neatly by the wall, and stared at it. He couldn't destroy it. It was too distinctive. The navy blue with a ribbon tied on the handle. Anyone who saw it would remember. So he decided to move it later, somewhere far enough that it couldn't be traced back easily. Then came the hardest part: what to do with her body. He turned toward the locked room again. The key hung from a small hook above the door frame. His hand trembled as he reached for it, then stopped halfway. He couldn't. Not again. That room was already a secret graveyard of shame, a private museum of control. He wouldn't add to it. Instead, he dragged the blanket-wrapped body closer to the door and waited for the cover of darkness. Around 2 a.m., a resident walking his dog outside saw a man loading something into the trunk of a black sedan. It looked like a big rolled-up rug, the man later told police. "I didn't think anything of it at the time. People move all sorts of stuff at night." That rug was Lena. Jordan drove for nearly 40 minutes through back roads until he reached a wooded stretch beyond the city's edge. Surveillance cameras would later trace his car's route via traffic lights and license plate scanners, placing him there between 2:37 and 3:05 a.m. He returned home just before dawn. For 3 days, he pretended nothing had happened. He scrolled through social media, liked posts, even went for coffee. When detectives eventually arrived at his door on June 18th, he opened it with a practiced calm. "She never came here," he said smoothly. "We planned to meet, but she canceled. I guess she went somewhere else." But the story unraveled fast. Detectives showed him footage from the building lobby. Lena entering beside him, her blue ribbon trailing behind. No footage showed her leaving. Jordan's mask began to crack. "Maybe she slipped out while I was asleep," he mumbled. "You can't prove otherwise." Then they told him about the blood under the fresh paint, about the phone data that went dead inside his apartment, about the neighbor who heard the thud. His silence said everything. When investigators opened the locked room, the truth deepened. Inside, they found Ava Sinclair's belongings, her bracelet, sweatshirt, and a notebook filled with sketches in her handwriting. For the detectives, it was confirmation that what happened to Lena wasn't spontaneous. It was a cycle. Detective Marco Ruiz wrote in his report, "The locked room served as both shrine and secret. It preserved his history of control, the objects belonging to those who tried to leave." Jordan refused to comment about Ava. "That's not what this is about," he muttered. But it was. Forensic teams swabbed the hallway, pulling traces of blood that matched Lena's DNA. The paint job was fresh, the fingerprints smeared. The entire scene screamed of panic, not planning. Within days, they found her. His phone's GPS placed him in a wooded area north of the city. A team of officers combed through the site and uncovered a shallow grave wrapped in a gray blanket. Lena's body was still dressed in the same clothes from the airport. When they told Carla, she broke down completely. "She texted me," she said through tears. "I knew it wasn't her. I just knew." Confronted with the evidence, Jordan's confidence collapsed. His recorded confession began quietly. "She looked at me like I was nothing," he said, voice low. "I couldn't let her go out there and laugh about me." He claimed it wasn't intentional. He said he panicked. He said he'd lost control for a second. But as the detective reminded him, it only takes a second to destroy an entire life. The investigation tied everything together: the fake texts, the painted wall, the secret room, the missing ex-girlfriend. Jordan's apartment wasn't just the scene of one crime, it was a museum of every lie he'd ever told. And for the families of Lena Marlowe and Ava Sinclair, justice had only begun its long and painful path. By the fall of 2021, the name Jordan Hale had become synonymous with deception, rage, and the darkest side of modern romance. When the case of State of Florida versus Hale opened at the Broward County Courthouse, the media packed every seat. The story had all the elements that true crime headlines thrive on: love, betrayal, double lives, and the digital mirage of online intimacy. But for the people in the front row, Carla Nguyen, Danielle Sinclair, and the families of both women, this wasn't spectacle. It was the slow unearthing of their grief under fluorescent lights. Prosecutor Helena Ortiz, sharp in tone and composure, began with a simple sentence that cut through the noise. "This is not the story of a man who snapped. This is the story of a man who believed control was love." Her voice carried a quiet authority, the kind that made jurors lean forward. She laid out the prosecution's narrative like a film reel: how Lena traveled from Detroit to Fort Lauderdale, the surveillance footage of her stepping into Jordan's car, the cell data that tracked her final hours, and the digital trail that exposed his cover-up. Piece by piece, Ortiz built the framework of what she called a deliberate erasure. Detective Marco Ruiz was first to testify. Calm but visibly moved, he recounted the moment they realized what had happened. "The cameras show them entering together," he told the court. "No footage shows her leaving. That told us everything." He described finding the faint blood traces under the freshly painted section of wall, the matching DNA results, and the locked room that changed the case entirely. When he mentioned the items inside, Ava Sinclair's bracelet, sweatshirt, and handwritten notebook, there was an audible murmur in the courtroom. The connection between the two women had finally been made visible. Jurors stared at the photos projected onto the courtroom screen, the small, ordinary objects that now carried the weight of two disappearances. Jordan's attorney, Mark Ellman, tried to redirect the narrative. He painted Jordan as a young man broken by trauma, insisting the death was a moment of panic, not malice. "He lost control," Ellman argued. "He didn't plan this. He didn't lure her to die. He was desperate for love and consumed by shame." But the words rang hollow against the prosecution's evidence. When Ortiz rose for cross-examination, her tone turned surgical. "Mr. Ellman says his client panicked," she said, pacing before the jury. "But tell me, do panicked people repaint walls? Do they send fake text messages? Do they bury a body and lock away trophies from another woman who vanished?" Her voice didn't rise, but the silence that followed was deafening. Then came Carla Nguyen. She took the stand clutching a small scarf, Lena's favorite. Her voice trembled, but she didn't falter. "She was happy that morning," Carla said softly. "She said she'd found someone who made her feel alive again. She texted me from the airport, said she'd call later." She paused, breathing carefully. "When I got that text saying Miami is beautiful, I knew it wasn't her. She never called me sis. I told myself maybe she was just tired, but deep down I knew." Her words left several jurors wiping tears. Then Danielle Sinclair, Ava's sister, testified. She described years of searching, begging police to reopen her sister's missing person file. "We didn't have proof," she said. "Now we do." The prosecution played portions of Jordan's recorded confession for the jury. His voice, cold and monotone, filled the courtroom. "She looked at me like I was nothing. I couldn't take it. I pushed her. She hit the wall. Then she wasn't moving." Jurors watched his expression on the video, blank, detached, without a trace of remorse. Ortiz paused the playback and turned to the jury. "That is not panic," she said. "That is ownership. He couldn't stand the idea of losing control, so he made sure no one would ever laugh at him again." Next came Dr. Karen Blake, a forensic psychologist specializing in narcissistic rage. "Men like Mr. Hale," she explained, "don't kill for power in the usual sense. They kill to avoid humiliation. Exposure is unbearable to them. When their constructed identity cracks, violence fills the gap." The jury listened in stunned silence. When asked about the locked room, Dr. Blake nodded grimly. "It's a behavioral hallmark, creating a private space to preserve the illusion of control. It's not about storage. It's about ownership of what they've lost." Outside, news vans filled the courthouse steps. Reporters called it the 7-hour case. National outlets ran segments comparing it to cautionary tales of online dating gone wrong. Advocacy groups flooded social media with hashtags demanding stronger digital safety measures. Inside, the trial pressed on, methodical, relentless. In her final statement, Ortiz stood before the jury one last time. "Lena Marlowe traveled across this country for love. She met a man who told her everything she wanted to hear until she saw the truth. For that, she was silenced. Ava Sinclair saw it too 2 years earlier. For that, she vanished. The defendant did not lose control. He took it by ending theirs." She turned to face Jordan. And when he buried Lena, he thought the silence would protect him. But silence doesn't protect killers. It only delays justice. The defense spoke briefly afterward, but it barely registered. The evidence had already spoken louder than any plea for sympathy. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The air inside the courtroom was thick with anticipation. The foreperson stood, holding the slip of paper that would decide everything. "On count 1, the murder of Lena Marlowe. We find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. On count 2, related to the death of Ava Sinclair, we find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps echoed. Carla gripped Lena's scarf tighter, tears streaming silently. Danielle bowed her head. Jordan didn't react. He stared ahead, blank, as if the verdict belonged to someone else. A week later, Judge Raymond Delaney delivered the sentence. "Mr. Hale," he said, his tone calm but unflinching, "you built your life on lies and used them to destroy others. For the murder of Lena Marlowe and Ava Sinclair, this court sentences you to death by lethal injection." The gavel fell. Carla whispered under her breath, "You can rest now, Elle." Danielle's voice cracked beside her. "We finally know." Outside, the cameras swarmed, capturing the moment justice was pronounced. Reporters shouted questions that no one wanted to answer. The families walked away holding hands, united by shared loss rather than victory. Because in truth, there were no winners, only survivors. As the crowd dispersed, a single line from the prosecutor's closing echoed in every broadcast that night. He believed silence would keep him safe, but silence only echoes louder in the end. When the gavel fell and Jordan Hale was led away in shackles, a heavy stillness filled the courtroom. To the world, justice had been served, but for the people who loved Lena Marlowe and Ava Sinclair, justice didn't feel like peace. It felt like a door closing on answers they'd never get. In the months that followed, Florida's heat softened into its quiet season, but the story of those 7 hours refused to fade. Newspapers still ran her photograph, that bright scarf, that hopeful smile. Above headlines that asked what so many were thinking, how could something so ordinary become so fatal? Back in Detroit, Lena's sister organized a memorial at a small art gallery where Lena used to display her work. The walls were lined with her watercolor paintings, sunlight, ocean waves, portraits of strangers smiling. At the entrance, a sign read, "She believed in love, we believe in change." Carla Nguyen stood quietly in front of the display, her eyes glistening. When the reporters asked her why she chose that phrase, she said, "Because Lena wasn't naive. She just had hope, and the world punished her for it." That night, the event turned from memorial to movement. Dozens of women shared stories of online relationships that turned controlling, manipulative, or frightening. Some had escaped early. Others were still untangling themselves from digital webs of charm and guilt. One young woman in tears told Carla, "I almost went to meet a man I barely knew last year. I stopped because I remembered this case. I think your friend saved me." It was the first time Carla felt the word justice mean something beyond a courtroom. Weeks later, a coalition of advocacy groups launched a campaign named 7 Hours Too Soon. Billboards went up across the Midwest and Florida with Lena's face, paired with the words, "She wanted love. She deserved life." The campaign encouraged safer dating practices, location sharing, video verification, background searches, but also something deeper, listening to your instincts. On talk shows and podcasts, experts began using the case as a textbook example of coercive empathy, where abusers weaponize vulnerability to gain trust. Dr. Karen Blake, the forensic psychologist who had testified at trial, said during an interview, "Charm isn't affection, it's performance, and when the mask slips, people like Jordan Hale don't see partners. They see mirrors reflecting back the truth they can't stand." Her words struck a chord. Within months, new safety features were added to major dating platforms, including clearer options to report harassment or inconsistencies. But even as the public turned Lena's tragedy into progress, investigators quietly continued their work. Detective Marco Ruiz and his team still combed through Hale's digital footprints, discovering conversations with at least 6 other women across various states. None had been harmed, but the messages followed the same pattern: flattery, fast affection, subtle control. In one exchange, Hale had written, "I don't like when people doubt me. It makes me do things I regret." To Detective Ruiz, it was proof that Lena and Ava weren't isolated cases. They were the ones who got too close to his truth. "We may never know how many women he manipulated," Ruiz said during a press briefing. "But we do know this. His pattern of control began long before it turned violent." He paused, glancing toward the crowd of cameras. And that's why stories like this matter, because danger doesn't always arrive with a threat. Sometimes it arrives with a compliment. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and television specials soon picked up the story. But rather than sensationalizing it, many focused on its human cost. In one particularly moving documentary, Carla revisited the timeline of Lena's last day, from the airport footage to the text messages. When the video reached the moment Lena's phone went dark, Carla's voice cracked. "I replay that moment every night," she said. "If I had called the police sooner, maybe—" She stopped, shaking her head. But guilt doesn't bring her back. Only change does. The camera cut to the courtroom verdict, then to a closing shot of Lena's scarf, the same one she wore when she boarded the plane, folded neatly beside a candle. The image went viral online. Talk shows debated what Lena's story revealed about modern loneliness. How many people, they asked, scroll through messages looking for comfort without realizing they're handing pieces of themselves to strangers? One journalist put it best. "We live in an age where love is typed, not spoken, but behind every message, there's a real heartbeat. And sometimes, a real danger." Lena's case became a symbol, not of fear, but of awareness. Universities used it in psychology lectures. Churches held workshops about online safety. Even law enforcement agencies began collaborating with tech companies to create tools for early detection of coercive patterns in messaging. For once, tragedy was teaching before it was forgotten. And yet, some questions never left the shadows. The locked room, the one that had haunted investigators, remained the most chilling symbol of all. Inside were Ava Sinclair's belongings, but not her remains. Despite Jordan's conviction, Ava's body was never found. Her sister, Danielle, still visits the beach every year on Ava's birthday, lighting 2 candles, one for her sister and one for Lena. "We got justice," she said quietly, "but we didn't get closure. He took that too." The locked room was sealed as evidence, but for those who knew the case, it became a metaphor. For every unanswered message, every unseen red flag, every warning unheeded. As months turned into a year, the noise of the media faded. Jordan Hale sat in solitary confinement awaiting his sentence, and the world moved on to new headlines. But in small ways, Lena's memory continued to ripple. Carla started a non-profit called Lena's Light, offering emotional support to people who suspect they're being manipulated online. Her mission statement read, "Because silence shouldn't be the price of love." In the first 6 months, the hotline received over 2,000 calls. Many of them began the same way. "I think I'm in something I can't explain." Carla listened to every one. In the final chapter of her life, Lena had written in her personal journal, and discovered later in her apartment, a simple sentence: "Maybe love isn't about finding someone who completes you. Maybe it's about finding someone who doesn't erase you." Those words were printed on the memorial program at her funeral. They became the mantra of the movement her story inspired, a reminder that love without respect is just control in disguise. And so the story of Lena Marlowe and Ava Sinclair ends, not in the courtroom or the grave, but in the conversations their names sparked. Every time a friend double-checks a location share, every time a woman trusts her gut and ends a conversation that feels wrong, every time someone asks, "Are you sure you're safe?" their memory is alive. Because love should never be a gamble. Because no one should have to die to remind the world that kindness can be dangerous when it comes wrapped in lies. As the camera fades on the documentary's final scene, the narrator's voice returns. Steady, reflective, and personal. Lena's story isn't just about one woman from Detroit or one man in Florida. It's about all of us. The trust we give too easily, the warnings we ignore, and the courage it takes to walk away before it's too late. Wherever you're watching from tonight, protect your heart, but protect your safety more. If this story moved you, share it, because awareness saves lives. The screen goes dark, The music fades, and for a moment, the only sound is the echo of 7 hours. A lifetime condensed into tragedy, and now into legacy.